We have breaking news now. You are seeing protests erupting in the Los Angeles area tonight as law enforcement squares off with crowds protesting immigration raids in the city. For 2 days in a row, the LAPD has used flashbangs and tear gas to clear demonstrators. The Trump administration is deploying 2,000 National Guardsmen, a move California's governor called inflammatory. And the FBI says it will investigate protesters for interfering with federal agents. Let's get to CNN's Julia Vargas Jones now, who's with protesters who've gathered in downtown Los Angeles. And Julia, what have you seen so far?
One of the most dangerous illusions of our time is the notion that law can be treated as a suggestion, that borders can be erased by sentiment, and that a nation can survive when its sovereignty is reduced to a slogan. The recent anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles, marked by burning cars, assaults on federal officers, and demands to abolish the very agency tasked with enforcing our immigration laws, are not merely a local disturbance. They are a symptom of a deeper crisis, a crisis of principle, of reason, and of the rule of law itself. When law becomes optional, civilization becomes negotiable. And make no mistake, what we are witnessing in Los Angeles is not a negotiation for justice, but a demand for surrender. Let us begin with the facts, unadorned by the emotional haze that so often clouds these discussions. Over 2 days, protests in Los Angeles escalated into chaos. Demonstrators set vehicles ablaze, obstructed federal agents, and defaced property. Some waved foreign flags, Mexican among others, while chanting for the abolition of immigration and customs enforcement and the release of detained immigrants. These are not the actions of a reasoned grievance, but the hallmarks of mob rule. There is a clear line between lawful protest, which is the right of every citizen, and lawlessness, which is the enemy of every society. Yet for political convenience, many blur this line, pretending that destruction is dialogue and violence is virtue. Symbols can obscure the plain truth. The truth here is straightforward. Some individuals with no legal right to be in this country are detained under laws passed by those elected to represent us. These protests are not about defending humanity. They are about defying the very idea of law enforcement when it clashes with ideology. What kind of nation survives when its laws are treated as optional? Burning cars is not an expression of compassion. It is an act of destruction that endangers lives and livelihoods. Obstructing federal officers is not a defense of human rights. It is an assault on the mechanisms that keep a society functional. When protesters block roads or surround federal buildings, as they did in Paramount in downtown Los Angeles, they are not merely exercising free speech. They are attempting to impose their will through intimidation. What is the end game here? If every law can be vetoed by a mob, what remains of governance? If every officer enforcing the law is branded a villain, who will uphold it? To understand this crisis, we must distinguish between legal and illegal immigration, a distinction often obscured by those who prefer emotional appeal to empirical clarity. Legal immigration is a process governed by rules designed to balance a nation's generosity with its capacity. Illegal immigration, by contrast, is a violation of those rules, an act that undermines the very system that makes legal immigration possible. No one disputes the humanity of those who cross borders unlawfully, but humanity does not confer immunity from law. No nation can survive with a border in theory and a welcome mat in practice. Immigration and customs enforcement exists for one reason: to enforce the laws that Congress has passed. Those laws are not arbitrary. They reflect the reality that no nation can absorb unlimited numbers of people without straining its resources, its infrastructure, and its social cohesion. In Los Angeles, ICE agents arrested about 118 individuals, including 5 gang members and others with criminal histories ranging from drug trafficking to domestic violence. These are not the huddled masses of poetic imagination. They are individuals who have broken laws, some violently. Yet the narrative peddled by protesters and amplified by sympathetic media is one of indiscriminate cruelty, as if ICE agents are rounding up innocents for sport. History offers examples of what happens when immigration enforcement becomes politicized. In the 1980s, Britain faced a crisis of unchecked immigration, leading to strained public services and social unrest. When the government moved to enforce its laws, it was met with accusations of heartlessness. Yet enforcement restored order and preserved the nation's ability to welcome legal immigrants. Similarly, Australia's strict border policies in the early 2000s were decried as inhumane, but ultimately reduced illegal crossings and restored public confidence in the immigration system. The lesson is clear. When enforcement is abandoned, the system collapses. Chaos follows, and the first victims are often the very communities protesters claim to champion. What does it mean to abolish ICE? Does it mean no border enforcement at all? No deportation of criminals? No limits on who can enter and remain? Protesters rarely answer these questions because to do so would expose the absurdity of their position. A nation without borders is not a nation, it is a free-for-all. And in a free-for-all, the strong prey on the weak, the lawless triumph over the law-abiding, and the very compassion protesters invoke becomes a casualty of the chaos they create. The Trump administration's decision to deploy 2,000 National Guardsmen to Los Angeles has drawn predictable outrage. California Governor Gavin Newsom called it purposefully inflammatory, claiming it escalates tensions. Mayor Karabas decrying the terror sown by federal actions, but let us examine this with clarity. The deployment is not a response to peaceful protest, but to violence, burning cars, assaults on officers, and deliberate obstruction of federal law. When local authorities fail to maintain order, the federal government has not just the right, but the duty to intervene. In 1957, President Eisenhower sent federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to enforce school desegregation against the defiance of Governor Oval-Faubus. The issue was not the number of troops, but the principle. Federal law cannot be nullified by local resistance. Similarly, in Los Angeles, the issue is not 2,000 guardsmen, but the refusal of state and city leaders to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. Newsom's claim that there is no unmet need for federal assistance is belied by the chaos on the ground. If local authorities are capable of handling the situation, why are federal agents being attacked? Why are streets burning? Critics argue the response is disproportionate. But what is the alternative? Allow mobs to dictate policy? Permit lawlessness to spread unchecked? During Hurricane Katrina, the National Guard was deployed in far greater numbers, over 50,000, to restore order and provide relief. No one called that disproportionate because the crisis was undeniable. The crisis in Los Angeles is no less real, though its causes are ideological rather than natural. When elected officials openly resist the law they swore to uphold, they invite federal intervention. To complain about the consequences is to dodge responsibility for the cause. Why does this chaos persist? The answer lies in incentives. Politicians like Newsom and Bass gain by posturing as defenders of the downtrodden, even if their policies enable lawlessness. Activists gain by amplifying outrage, turning every arrest into a cause célèbre. The media gains by sensationalizing conflict, framing ICE raids as atrocities while downplaying the violence of protesters. This is not a conspiracy. It is human nature. People respond to the incentives before them, and in a polarized age, the incentive is to inflame rather than inform. Images of burning cars and tear gas dominate headlines, but the context is often absent. We hear little about the criminal histories of some detainees or the legal basis for ICE's actions. Instead, we get sound bites about families torn apart and communities terrorized. The media's selective outrage is predictable. When protesters wave foreign flags and attack federal agents, it is framed as resistance. When ICE enforces the law, it is branded as oppression. This asymmetry distorts reality, convincing many that the problem is not lawlessness, but the attempt to stop it. Consider the case of David Huerta, president of the Service Employees International Union, arrested during the protests. Newsom called him a patriot, harmed for witnessing government action. But federal authorities say Huerta obstructed agents, an act that goes beyond passive observation. Why was the union leader interfering with a federal operation? Such incidents are not about justice, but about power. Power to control the narrative, to rally supporters, and to undermine the law. The protests are cloaked in moral language, compassion, human rights, justice, but intentions are not outcomes. The moral facade of these protests hides their real-world cost. Who suffers when lawlessness is normalized? Not the politicians or activists, safe in their offices and studios. The victims are the taxpayers who bear the costs of unchecked illegal immigration, estimated at $150 billion annually nationwide. They are the legal immigrants who follow the rules, only to see their sacrifices cheapened by those who bypass them. They are the residents of neighborhoods like Paramount, where burning cars and clashing mobs disrupt daily life. The issue is not compassion versus cruelty, but civilization versus chaos. Compassion is not letting lawbreakers go free. It is ensuring that the law protects everyone, including the most vulnerable. When protesters demand the release of detained immigrants, they are not advocating for compassion, but for selective lawlessness. And selective lawlessness has a way of spreading. Today it is immigration law. Tomorrow it could be any law that offends the mob's sensibilities. The hypocrisy is striking. Many who decry ICE raids live in gated communities or affluent suburbs far from the neighborhoods most affected by illegal immigration. They champion sanctuary policies but rarely face the crime, overcrowding, or strained schools that often follow. If these policies are so compassionate, why do their advocates shield themselves from their effects? Moral posturing is cheap, but accountability is costly. History offers sobering lessons. In the 5th century, the Roman Empire's failure to secure its borders contributed to its collapse as unchecked migration overwhelmed its resources and fractured its unity. In modern times, Europe's 2015 migration crisis led to spikes in crime and social tension in countries like Germany and Sweden, where lax enforcement fueled public backlash. No nation, ancient or modern, has survived by treating its borders as optional or its laws as negotiable. Countries like Japan and Singapore maintain strict immigration controls, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. They understand that a nation's first duty is to its citizens, and that duty cannot be fulfilled if borders are porous and laws are ignored. Why is America held to a standard no other nation is expected to meet? Why must we apologize for protecting our sovereignty while others are praised for doing the same? The waving of foreign flags in Los Angeles is a reminder of this double standard. Imagine Americans protesting in Mexico City, waving U.S. flags and demanding the abolition of Mexican immigration enforcement. The response would be swift and uncompromising, yet in the United States, such displays are met with excuses or silence. This is not a sign of strength, but of weakness, a weakness that invites further challenges to our laws and our identity as a nation. There is a thin line between civilization and barbarism. That line is called law. It does not bend to hashtags or headlines, nor does it yield to the loudest voices or the most vivid images. The anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles are not a cry for justice, but a demand for lawlessness dressed in the garb of compassion. They reflect a broader malaise, a belief that feelings trump facts, that intentions outweigh consequences, and that a nation can endure without enforcing its own rules. History has many lessons, but one stands out. Mobs tear down faster than reason can build up. The burning cars, the foreign flags, the attacks on officers, these are not the tools of progress, but the symptoms of decline. If we are to preserve what makes this nation great, its rule of law, its ordered liberty, its promise of opportunity, we must reject the illusion that law can be optional or borders can be symbolic. We must choose civilization over chaos, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. The choice is ours, but the consequences will be history's. Let us hope we choose wisely for the sake of those who built this nation, those who sustain it, and those who will inherit it. The first lesson of economics is scarcity. There is never enough of anything to fully satisfy all those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. In Los Angeles, we are seeing the cost of that disregard. It is a cost we can ill afford.